we have seen Trump offer an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin, saying in the war, and not only in the war, in 10 days. We have a clip from President Trump. I want you to hear it directly from him.
You mentioned that you would change the Russia deadline to 10 to 12 days. Has that started yet, or when can we, see the official statement that is the new deadline?
I'll tell you what. I'll give it to you now. Do you want a big scoop?
Yes. Please.
Everybody else, close your ears. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
10 days from today.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Good.
Have you communicated?
We have a scoop.
Thank you.
And then, we're going to put on tariffs and stuff, and I don't know if it's going to affect Russia, because he wants to obviously probably keep the war going. But we're going to put on tariffs and the various things that you put on. It may or may not affect them, but it could.
There could be some real economic impact to Russia. Now, specifically for the oil and gas industry, I know that's something that they have talked about. We do not do business with them, right? Correct?
Right. We don't use Russian oil and gas.
So it shouldn't affect our gas prices?
Europe does. And what we also saw was that President Trump announced this big trade deal with the European Union, and a lot of that would have to do with energy. And we could see that the European Union, if there's sanctions on Russia with that oil and gas, could start leaning more into the U.S. and getting their energy from here. Whenever there's a disruption in the global pipeline of energy, there could be some effects domestically where the price of crude oil goes up around the world, and then therefore that translates back at home. But President Trump has been working on building back up the strategic oil reserves that were decimated under the previous administration. But we're also seeing the reaction out of Russia so far. And what we're seeing is from the former president of Russia. This was the...
You may have seen the headline that said, was sparking international meltdown, international outrage. That is because there is some big concern.
So this is from Dmitry Medvedev, who was the third president of Russia. He was this president that was sort of a Putin puppet for a while, that was put in office while they changed their constitution so that Putin could effectively be president for life. But what he put on X was... Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. Those are strong words coming out of a former president, but now the deputy chair of Russia's Security Council.
And certainly, look, he's not necessarily wrong in this. You are dealing with Vladimir Putin. However, what clearly President Trump learned that maybe Joe Biden knew a little bit about too, which was Putin is not up for negotiating right now. He is not up for ending this war just because, or because the U.S. threats something. They have to come up with a real reason for him to stop the war. And you can see the tide turn where President Trump started to support Ukraine more than he had before. He had certainly been almost a neutral party, but then you start seeing him lean more towards Ukraine. Why? I think he got into it, and you actually see what's going on, realize you can't negotiate currently with the Putin administration.
I think we should play this flashback bite because it has Dmitry Medvedev in it when he was president of the United States, president of Russia, but still Vladimir Putin, everyone knew, was really the one that controlled everything in Russia at the time. But this is with about 13 years ago, another U.S. president who liked to look tough about Russia publicly, but there was a hot mic moment we should remind people of as Barack Obama was talking with Dmitry Medvedev about, look, I'm talking tough now, but just wait until I get done with my election.
This was the re-election time. This was 2012, so heading into the re-election.
My last election, yeah, and after my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and
I will transmit this information to Vladimir. I mean, what? This was 2012.
Which is the most James Bond spy film quote of all time of I will transmit this information to Vladimir.
That's some translation right there, man. I like it. But when you read that or when you see that, you got to remember, sure, that was now 13 years ago. But we were dealing with that situation then. So you had a pretty good relationship with many of these presidents. Then you have such a bad relationship with the Biden administration because they decided just to shut out anyone that they disagreed with, to not sit down and have any of these meetings. And that could fuel the fact that now you have a president, or now you have Vladimir Putin, who is really unwilling to have those negotiations that he would have maybe 4 years ago. Has there been any conversation, Will, between him and Zelensky offering similar thoughts? Because though their war has been less incursion, it's still an ongoing effort from both sides.
Right. So this is mainly focused on Russia because the fact of Russia being the aggressor in
The
this.
thought
is
that if Russia ends, it will end.
Yes. I mean, there's been speculation about what the Americans would consider an end to the war versus what the Ukrainians would consider an end to the war versus what the Russians would consider an end to the war. But what we are seeing is that President Trump, who ran on ending wars, not creating wars, is now focusing on the big Russia-Ukraine issue and putting these ultimatums forward mainly to Russia because Russia is the one that is the aggressor, has kind of blown past previous discussions and talks that President Trump has tried to encourage or put forward or mediate. And we're seeing even that comment where President Trump said that Vladimir Putin called him and said, do you need help with Iran? And he was like, no, I need help with you, because you're not really being a good faith negotiator in this situation. But we're seeing also the former president, but now deputy chair of the Security Council, so in a high-ranking position still, Dmitry Medvedev, and he had that first post on X I told you about in the previous segment.
You say that name so clearly.
Well, we've talked about this man for quite a while. Yeah, it's a fun name. It's got some.
It's got a sing-songy
fun
kind of
consonants that appear, and when there's multiple V's in a name.
But it's not Medved.
No, there's
not
a
like
Vedev.
Medvedev. I digress.
Words are fun. So we're going to talk about this, but he also said this other post, this was just from last week, that is still his focus is on President Trump. This is when President Trump toyed with the fact of making this this deadline shorter, and he said Trump issued a theatrical ultimatum to the Kremlin. The world shuddered, expecting the consequences. Belligerent Europe was disappointed, and Russia didn't care. And then followed it up today with this this very direct, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things, basically threatening to escalate this to a confrontation with the United States and NATO, which would be quite the escalation, and not what anyone, I think, in Russia, as well as Ukraine, nor the United States or anywhere in the world would really want to see. That's tough talk coming from the Russians. However, we now also see that President Trump's negotiation has been successful in places such as the European Union, which a lot of people thought would have been the hardest trade deal to get forward. And it's not even so much about the tariffs there, but the investment from the European Union, which does a lot of business with Russia and former Soviet states and things of that nature, really starting to pour investment into the United States. And that makes a sea change for the economic reality of the Russian Federation when they need as much revenue coming in because they have a very costly, draining war that is still ongoing. I think that if the economic pressure points are right, losing the economic boost from the European Union, if all of that investment or a lot of that investment starts focusing towards the United States, at the same time as President Trump offering and threatening higher tariffs, secondary sanctions, things of that nature, it could put President Putin in a very difficult situation because of that economic factor. And the economic warfare that President Trump uses a lot of times is the most effective tool.